Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out here. We are honored today to have Ms. Karen Freeman Wilson from the Chicago Urban League as part of our Fight for Equality initiative. And we're going to be asking her some amazing questions as she's going to be talking about some of the amazing work that she's been doing as a part of the organization.
Well, good morning. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you very much for being here.
So to start things off, can you talk briefly about the Chicago Urban League and also what your role is within the organization?
The Urban League is an organization that promotes racial justice through economic empowerment and programming in the Black community. It is an organization that is a part of a national affiliate, the National Urban League. However, Chicago is one of the oldest and largest affiliates, having been established in 1906. My role with the organization as president and CEO is to lead the work that we do. And we do this in a variety of ways, primarily through research and policy, and then through programming in education, housing, and financial empowerment, entrepreneurship and innovation, and through our work in workforce development. And we have a team in each of those areas that promotes the mission of the league. And we do that through services to residents of the greater Chicagoland area, but we also do it through through amplifying our voice throughout the community.
That's amazing. A lot of that work is very long term. And actually, we had a conversation with someone yesterday, and he said that probably correctly that America doesn't really like long term initiatives because we're afraid about what the outcome might be. And there is some truth to that, I think. So it's amazing that the Chicago Urban League is taking the initiative and actually putting in the effort to produce some long term results. So,
I think that that is an interesting observation, and I think that um, the most impactful initiatives are long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we look back through history, nothing has ever happened in 20 years, 30 years. It's been a continuous movement towards equality, and that movement shouldn't and hasn't stopped yet. And so,
Sure. And then you have milestones
yes.
in each of those initiatives. You're right.
Absolutely. So in our research, we encountered that you spent a little time in public office and also in the private sector. So how has that experience emboldened your determination to help end racial equality in Chicago, and how has it kind of shaped your mentality becoming president and CEO of this organization?
Well, what I really focus on is service, service to individuals. And I've been very fortunate to serve individuals in a variety of ways, certainly through public service as a judge, as Indiana Attorney General, as the mayor of the city of Gary, but also service through my work with drug treatment courts as the CEO of that national organization, and now through my work with the Urban League. And so the consistent theme through all of my throughout my career, has been service. And that is something that was really instilled in me early by my parents. And it's something that I, in turn, work to instill in our daughter, that service is really important. And it's not only allowed me to utilize my law uh, career or my law skills or legal skills. It's not only allowed me to use the other skills that I've developed, but it's also been extremely gratifying.
That's amazing. So going off about that, do you have any stories or specific experiences that kind of shaped your worldwide view significantly, or what motivated you to start working with the Chicago Urban League?
Well, what motivated me about the Chicago Urban League is that their mission included many of the things that I am passionate about. The opportunity to build wealth through business development and housing, the opportunity to secure a career and employment, the investment in young people through our education services, and the development of leadership, both civic and professional leadership, through our impact program, were all things that I thought were extremely important in the African American community. And so that the opportunity to work on those initiatives day in and day out to pursue racial justice, particularly in this day and age, was something that made me very, that attracted me to the Urban
There are a lot of people in the country, in our community as well, that like kind of deny the existence of these systemic disparities, and it's amazing to see so many organizations constantly fighting against that like backlash, as well as the actual disparities themselves. And so the work that the Chicago Urban League does is truly incredible, simply because you are um, facing a lot of obstacles, and despite that, you continue to push forward. So as we learned a little bit about the organization, we were really impressed with like the rich history of it. So how have these efforts continued or changed, or what like struggles have you continued to see African American Black communities go through?
Well, I think that you're right that people struggle with the notion of institutional or structural racism because they don't understand history. If you understood the impact of history on the lives of Black folks, then you would understand that once slavery was established, that created a subordinate class. And even though slavery ended, it didn't mean that there was the restoration of rights or the total restoration of status in society, or that people got dollars so that they could create their own lives. There were systemic initiatives that were utilized to continue the relegation of Black people. And, it's not just Black people, it's Native Americans, it is Latinx communities, particularly those who came from Mexico. So there is always this concept that there is a need to relegate people of color. And what that has done is it has required us to go from what addressing what was clearly overt racism to going to addressing what is kind of much more covert and much more systemic. And it's easy to address one person who is saying or doing something against a person because of the color of his or her skin. It's much more difficult to do that against a system. And so recently you had a report about the lending market or mortgage market here in Chicago. I think WBEZ did it. And they talked about the statistics. But the statistics only tell a part of the story. I think in order to really understand it, and more importantly, to correct it, there was one statistic that said there were more loans made in the North Side, in the communities of the North Side, than in all of the South and West Side communities in Chicago. And so that's a general statistic. In order to understand why this disparity exists, you really have to look at what are the lending practices, what are the policies. Do you have only one way that you determine whether people qualify for notes? Is it just that you cut everybody off at a certain credit score? If you make those blanket policies, then inevitably it's going to have a disparate impact, because Blacks don't have the opportunity to build wealth like their white counterparts. Blacks don't have the opportunity to establish collateral like their white counterparts. And so as a consequence, there is a disparity in incomes. And so you will have a disparity that you will observe in the lending rate. So the question is, how do you correct that? Do you simply lower the requirements? No, that's not necessary. But I think you do have to look behind the blanket numbers that you create to establish qualifications.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is definitely something that, like, when we're talking about solutions to these systemic issues, it's not about, like, it's about leveling the playing field, but not in the sense that everyone else has to come down. We need to uplift certain communities because they've historically been held back, and our
Sure.
history in this country has caused many communities to have a lack of opportunity, whether it be in school, whether it be in home ownership. There are very, like, where there are very many things that are entrenched in our systems that continue to limit opportunity for Black communities, Latinx communities, communities of color all over the country.
That
Absolutely.
is absolutely right. And I think it's important when you look at these criteria, when you look at the rules and regulations that govern certain things. And I'll use an example of saying that we don't hire convicted felons. Is there a nexus between the rule and what you're trying to achieve? Obviously, you don't want to hire someone who has been convicted of bank embezzlement as your controller. Not a good idea. But to blanketly say that for any job in my company, I'm not going to hire a convicted felon, you're cutting out or preventing a lot of good people from getting employment. But more importantly, you are also preventing your company from having a much more diverse perspective as they deliver services or goods in a community. So I think it cuts both ways. And that's a lose-lose scenario.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like we were talking about the disparities between different races, and in that regard, we saw a huge increase in support and advocacy for the Black Lives Matter movement this in the past few months. So, how has that impacted the Chicago Urban League, and do you think that these conversations are going to have a lasting impact?
Well, it has certainly created an interest in the work of the Chicago Urban League. People who support Black Lives Matter, and we do, want to understand how they can support all civil rights movements. And so to the extent that the Urban League is a civil rights organization, they are interested in the ability to support us. I think it has also heightened awareness generally. And so even those who might not want to be involved have become sympathetic and empathetic to the issues that are being addressed. And so if you look at polling, you have more folks of diverse backgrounds, of diverse races and genders who are saying we support Black Lives Matter because we want everyone to be treated fairly. And so, and then the other thing that I think it does is it raises the need to really address structural and institutional racism. And that's something I don't know that has ever been understood, because when you look at the actions of one police officer, it immediately calls attention to the policies. And in this case, the first policy that was called into question was the chokehold policy. So when you look at those policies, then you have to look at the institutions that have created these policies and call those institutions into question. And so I think all of those, um, the Black Lives Matter movement has impacted all of those issues.
Yeah, I think just in the past couple of months, my like I've always considered myself to be politically active, to be politically knowledgeable, and yet in the past couple of months, I've learned more about systemic racism and institutionalized practices than I have in the past 2 years. And so like
Sure,
this has
sure.
been like a very like for a lot of people, this has been a very incredible period of growth and learning and
Yes.
education, and it kind of instills this idea that we are never going to stop learning. We're never going to stop being educated, because once we stop, that's when we become complicit in the actions of these systems.
Well, you should learn something new every day.
Yeah.
That's just a general rule. But you're right. As we see more interest and more activity by the Black Lives Matter movement, you see more information that is being available. And it's important to, one, discern what's fact from fiction, but it's also important to read all perspectives.
Absolutely. So kind of shifting gears. So once the number of like COVID cases picked up, did you see changes in the number of people reaching out to the Chicago Urban League, or like or did you reach, or the number of people reaching out to like use the services that they offer? And how does the Chicago Urban League ensure that how has COVID-19 impacted the functions and the impact of the Chicago Urban League in the community?
We absolutely saw an increase in the number of individuals who reached out to us as a result of COVID-19. And early on, we were concerned about the ability of the students that were associated with our programs at the League to really learn in a way that would allow them to progress, not just in school, but in life. And so we started to talk about how we might help them. But we also understood that many of the aspects of structural racism, whether you're talking about the way that environmental racism impacts people living in the Black community, whether you're talking about the fact that many Blacks are employed in frontline positions, whether you're talking about the inequities that we understand to exist in education, we knew that all of those things would have an impact on the clients that we serve. And so, as a result of that belief, we developed a COVID-19 help center. And the thought was that this help center could allow us to make rapid responses. And so the first area that we were engaged was with the business community, because we knew that the shutdown would have a much more devastating impact on small businesses, on minority businesses, than it might have on the larger banks or the hotels or some of the larger businesses. And so we wanted to make ourselves available to coach, to counsel, to provide assistance to small businesses in the Black community. We did the same thing with those individuals who lost employment right away and who were threatened as a result of that. And then we did the same thing with those who had challenges paying their rent, paying their mortgages, to provide the advice that we knew that they needed in order to sustain and really to make it through COVID-19. We also knew that the impact of COVID would be exacerbated by the civil unrest. Particularly, this would have an impact on businesses, this would have an impact on people who were employed, and certainly it would have an impact on housing security. And so by developing the COVID-19 Help Center, by developing a research paper that focused on the inequities that COVID-19 not created, but really highlighted in society, we were able to offer services throughout the Chicagoland area and continue to do that. The impact, the direct impact on the league was that it required us to really pivot and think about how to offer virtual services, how to ensure that we continued our work, notwithstanding the fact that we too were sheltering in place and we too were not working in the office.
That is really amazing. I think after this whole situation, we've really seen organizations take a whole new stance on a lot of different things and really shift their gears quite quickly. So it's really
Sure.
you guys are doing that as well. So going into something specific you talked about, and this is kind of a personal inquiry from my end, but you talked a lot about entrepreneurship and the opportunities that the Chicago Urban League provides for African-American entrepreneurs. So how does this service translate back into the communities and improve the economic inequity? And how do you think businesses
go ahead. Go ahead. And how do I think?
How do you think the businesses can remain sustainable?
Well, I think that the most important aspect of it is that we are building wealth through entrepreneurship, through the development of businesses in the Black community. And anytime you're able to support, sustain, help a business grow, then you have the opportunity to not only build wealth for that generation of business owners, but for generations to come. And so you may see one person in the funeral business or insurance business or other businesses, but then you will see their children and their grandchildren to continue that same business. And so I think that's one of the greatest opportunities, that the ability to own a home, the ability to get a high-paying job are all abilities to amass and grow wealth. But certainly a business, business and entrepreneurship is one of the most sustainable ways.
Yeah, I mean, in my research, I've encountered the kind of like this idea that in order to like get out of poverty into like rise into the middle class, the three biggest things that you need are to build generational wealth, to have a college degree, and then home ownership. And those like investments that you make, those all require a very strong foundational like experience. And so I think that the businesses themselves provide that a lot of the time. If you have that foundation of like a steady income, and then those kids are able to either afford to go to college or they work in the businesses themselves and kind of build that generational wealth
Sure.
during the years. Yeah. So yeah, that is very incredible. So we know that the Chicago Urban League advocates for certain policies or legislation that can assist in your mission. What are some current programs, policies, or pieces of legislation that you hope to be implemented on the local, state, or federal level?
Well, one of the pieces of legislation at the local level in an ordinance, recently we supported two city ordinances that allowed for a moratorium on evictions and had an impact on how evictions were done in the in the city of Chicago. We believe it needs to go further and protect people who are in rental housing, to say there has to be a just cause for an eviction, and for individuals who are possibly even doing evictions because they're changing the nature of their rental property, then people ought to be compensated because it's a disruption, right? And so you have to move, you have to pay a security deposit, there's a cost involved. And so we continue to support taking those ordinances even further. We are also supporting an equitable distribution of proceeds from marijuana taxes. And we know that when the legislation was originally created, the thought was that it would be very equity based because there are so many people who have suffered from unjust incarceration, or certainly disparate numbers of people being incarcerated in the Black community, Black and Brown communities. And so we wanted to ensure that the tax dollars from that work would in fact go towards the um, the creation of an equitable distribution of grant dollars, of program dollars to help those communities. One of the last places that we have used our voice is in the way that educational dollars are distributed. We don't think that just because you live in a nice community should be the end of how education is funded in your community. We believe that even those young people who may not be born into better communities that have better schools should have an opportunity to have their education subsidized in a way that they can get the education that they need that would allow them to improve and pursue a good quality of life in the community.
Yeah, I was looking at our school budget for our district, which is Indian Prairie 204,
Sure.
Naperville, Aurora, and 78% of it is funded by property taxes. And
Yeah,
we're very privileged because a lot of the houses in our area are larger, and Naperville does have pretty high property taxes, and as a result, our schools are incredibly funded. But
sure.
that's not the truth, and like 95% of the schools in this country are funded primarily by property tax, which means
That
that
is correct.
as like the income level and the property value in certain communities goes down, so does the quality of those schools, which just seems kind of counterproductive.
That is correct. And again, that goes to the institution. Now, no one created that, I don't think, with the idea that we're going to fund um, education in Black and Brown communities less. But the way that the education funding formula is set up has that result.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you want to go ahead.
Yeah. So kind of wrapping things up, we want to just talk about how can an everyday person, like a student, an adult, whoever it is, contribute to the cause that you're fighting for, and what opportunities or resources are out there so that people can stay educated.
Well, I think that I'll go with the second part of the question first. Reading is important. Important. There's a New York Times project called the 1619 Project. I think that's something that is extremely helpful. The book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, is extremely important. So, to the extent that we have those resources and so many more, I mean, there are movies, documentaries. The documentary on John Lewis's life is something that's very timely right now. And then I think that the way that you can be helpful is to volunteer with organizations like the Urban League. And there's actually Quad County's Urban League in Aurora, but also to volunteer with the NAACP chapters locally, to volunteer with local chapters of Operation Push or the national um, in NAN, National Action Network. So there are a number of opportunities for volunteering, and then to use your voice. Inevitably, every one of us will encounter someone who makes an ignorant remark about someone of another race. And when someone says that, historically, people have just been uncomfortable, even if they don't agree with it, but they've been silent. There is no room for silence now. When you see something that is wrong, when you hear something that is wrong, you have to say something about it. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, there was a member of Congress, Senator, US Senator Cotton, I believe his name was, who talked about slavery being a necessary institution. The other members of Congress, the other members of the US Senate have to censor him, because anytime someone in a position of prestige like that says something that ignorant, there are people who will inevitably think that is correct. And when you have folks who think that, it makes it harder to fight against, not the, we know that slavery no longer exists, but the notion that blacks, that other people of color are at a lower level in society and should remain in a lower level of society than all of us are. That's really what the fight for equality is all about, that everyone is believed to be equal and is treated in a fair manner.
Yeah, I actually do. I actually was reading about Senator Tom Cotton's remarks yesterday, and it reminded me a lot of what we talked about in my AP US history class, and about how, like, slavery apologists during the time where abolitionism was kind of rising, they would talk about
Right.
slavery as the positive good, meaning that
Yeah.
while it was maybe morally wrong, it was a necessary institution, and to see that in 2020 is just ridiculous to me. And then
It's
just
mind blowing.
and to see people like justifying that by being like, yeah, he either didn't mean it, or like he was just saying that it's a part of our history, like that's ridiculous to me.
Why would you even allow that to come out of your mouth?
Absolutely, I think that
Yeah.
there definitely needs to be more conversations being had, and I think that a lot more people are aware of these issues, and that how, like, while racism in our institutions might not be as overt, it is definitely overt in our culture and our society.
Sure
um
it is. Sure it
so
is.
thank you very much for coming out and speaking with
Well,
us.
thank you all. And thank you for doing what you're doing. This is so important to the dialogue and to the work. So thank you all for being a part of the work.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care now.
You too. Thank you.
Bye bye.